People of Reddit who have encountered serial killers before they were caught, what is your story and how did you find out who they were? So this is third hand, but an old boss went to the University of Utah and was in a sorority. One day she was waiting for her date in front of her sorority house with a girlfriend who was also waiting for her date. Her girlfriend's date pulls up, but her girlfriend forgets something and runs back in the house. My former boss chatted to the man for a few minutes, she noted that he was polite and handsome. Her girlfriend comes out and they leave in his VW Beetle. My former boss gets picked up by her date a short while later and she thinks nothing of it. The next day she sees her girlfriend and asks how the date was. The girlfriend says that they started driving in her date's VW Beetle and all of a sudden she got a splitting headache. She thought it was really strange, but she felt nauseous. She apologized and asked him to take her home. He was a little upset, but he dropped her back off. They didn't go out again. Years pass, and my former boss is watching the news one night and sees a familiar man on the screen. It was Ted Bundy. Willie Pickton ran a fundraiser BBQ for a scout troop I was a part of. He brought all the pork and everything which we served up. Funny enough though, I had food poisoning the day earlier and wasn't feeling well still, so I didn't have anything at the BBQ. Good thing too, because some time later people found out the guy fed his murder victims to his pigs. Edit, found out because dude got busted and his face was everywhere for a solid 5 years. When my mom was 16 she was sleeping and woke up to someone trying to open her bedroom window. She ran to my grandma's room and told her someone was trying to break in. My grandma being the crazy awesome lady she is grabs a bat and runs outside and confronts this guy and starts swinging. The guy runs off and they don't think too much of it. Some time later my grandma sees the guy on the news and it's Richard Ramirez. My mom told this story over and over when I was growing up. She easily could have been one of his victims, I'm so grateful she wasn't especially since she was pregnant with me at the time. Super late to the party, but I have a good one. John Wayne Gacy. This didn't happen to me, but it actually happened to my father. During the 70s I believe, when he was in his late teens, early 20s, he was walking home from work late at night in the middle of winter in Chicago. A car pulled up alongside of him and with a very distinctive voice said, "Hey, do you need a ride somewhere?" My dad replied no and kept walking. He walked a few more steps and the car pulled up next to him again and the man inside said, "Are you sure you don't need a ride? It's really cold out, I don't mind dropping you off somewhere." My dad replied once again, "No, but thank you anyway." The car drove off and my dad didn't think much of it until a few months later when he was watching the news and heard that very distinctive voice once again. The man who offered him a ride was John Wayne Gacy, one of the most notorious, brutal serial killers of all time. Killing and sexually assaulting around 33 young men in the 70s. When my dad heard on the news that they had caught the killer and that it was indeed the man who offered him a ride that one night, he couldn't believe it, he had literally looked in the face of death. My friend lived across the street from the Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway, when he was a child. He said he has few memories of him, but he seemed like a nice normal man. Serial killers are generally good at not standing out too much. I grew up a couple blocks away from Gary Ridgway and his wife worked for my father for a short time before he was accused of anything. I never met him, but all my father's employees said the same thing about him when they met him. Kind of odd, a little quiet, but overall a nice guy. His wife quit working for my dad when he first became the primary suspect. When I was young my family doctor was Harold Shipman, who was the most prolific serial killer in UK history. I was too young to remember ever visiting him, but my parents always tell stories of how he came across as a nice guy and seemed a massive part of the community. He killed elderly women, which was part of the reason he wasn't caught for years, as the families didn't find it suspicious. He was eventually caught as he altered the will of one lady he murdered. Many people didn't believe it at the time and some believed he was doing it as a form of euthanasia. He was found guy and it's believed that he killed 250 plus people over his lifetime. Scary to think that I've been in the same room as that man. I live in Salt Lake, Utah. During the early 70s, around 71 my mother moved here with some friends. About 3 months after moving here she found my father and was truly smitten. But, a few weeks later she met a very charming man who asked her out on a date. She politely declined, saying she was already seeing someone. The man was Ted Bundy. My mum was a punk in Yorkshire in the late 70s early 80s. She drank with her friends in the local low-life pub with the prostitutes and weirdos. One day she was in, a man in a suit walked in and sat and stared at her all night until she told him where to go. He walked out and they spent the night laughing about the creepy guy. He was later arrested as Peter Sutcliffe aka the Yorkshire Ripper. A bit late and also not my personal experience, but my friend's mom. She was living in the Portland area of Oregon at the time and was in a rough patch during her life. She was hitchhiking and she said that a man pulled over and asked if she needed a ride. She hops in his car and during the trip he started asking very weird questions and just behaving odd. After a while she started to feel very uncomfortable and then asked if he could pull over and let her off. He then went ballistic and tried locking the door, but my friend's mom escaped and ran like hell. He didn't chase her, but instead drove off. A few years later she saw his name and picture on the news. Turns out that she had narrowly escaped being killed by Ted Bundy. Buried. My grandpa's aunt bought meat from Ed Gein and served it to the family on more than one occasion. Was probably normal meat, but super creepy still. Apparently he was just a loner guy in town, but not threatening or anything. I knew an almost mass murderer and he was an acquaintance of mine. He was a server in a bar I frequented and I'd see him around town a lot. I didn't know him well, mainly casual conversation when I did see him. He was always really nice and polite and we had some mutual friends. Then later I read the news and the FBI picked him up for planning to open fire at a specific location in the city. Not me, but my boyfriend lived in the same dorm as the Craigslist killer in college. He said he seemed like a quiet nerdy guy. Apparently he found out he murdered someone by getting a call from a news station asking if he would comment on what happened. My sister had a class with him. She said he was super smart and she was pissed because she thought he'd wreck the curve. She also said he'd always offer to walk some of the women in the class to their cars if it was dark out when class was done.